Users in IT or security roles often have a high level of privilege in a Microsoft Entra ID environment. This means that they're more valuable as a target for cybercriminals. It's not surprising then that it's vital to protect these users more than standard non-privileged users. I wrote an article recently that talked about the first 4 things you should look at when it comes to increasing your cybersecurity resilience in Entra ID. And in that article I mentioned that we should probably limit privileged accounts to accessing admin portals from compliant devices that are enrolled in Intune and joined to Entra ID. Managed devices that meet compliance policies like encryption, endpoint protection, are up to date with patches, generally reduce risks associated with personal or unmanaged devices. Let's have a look at how we can do that. There's a conditional access policy actually that we can just get from the template. We'll go to new policy from template. I'm going to go to protect administrator, and we have a few that generally protect the administrator, but this one here in particular require multi-factor authentication for Azure management. Now that specifically says Azure, not Entra, and actually does mean Azure. It does have a slight impact on some of the other portals to do with Entra and API and all that kind of stuff, but it really does mean Azure, like the infrastructure as a service platform, not Entra. There's a one just beneath that which says require MFA for Microsoft admin portals, which actually is going to be closer to what we need. We're going to choose require MFA for admin portals and choose review and create, and here are the roles that are included in this conditional access policy by default. The cloud app, let's just create it as report only and see what it looks like. There it is there. So we're including specific users, which are the directory roles that I mentioned, and then excluding me for now to test this out. You would also exclude your break glass accounts in here because that's a very safe thing to do. Look at what a break glass account is. If you haven't got one of those, you want to make sure you can get back in if something goes wrong. So we include these directory roles, and then the resources, it's Microsoft admin portals. Microsoft have grouped all of these together into something called Microsoft Admin Portals Cloud App so that you can just mention that specifically. And then the grant control here is grant require MFA strength, and it's gonna allow you to choose a specific strength that your multi-factor authentication should be. But I mentioned that we want to restrict it to just compliant devices, so we can also scroll down and choose require device to be marked as compliant. And if you're using hybrid, which you definitely shouldn't for these, you can require device to be hybrid joined as well. Now we want to make sure that all of these are selected, so they need to be a compliant device and have MFA in order to do admin work. So we'll choose require all, and that together will mean that we have a relatively secure means of accessing Microsoft admin portals. Let me just save that and move on. It did, while it was in report only mode, you might have seen there, it did just say it was going to exclude a load of stuff. You probably don't want to exclude a load of stuff because actually if we go back into that, I did make a mistake by choosing that, because if you look at the conditions and then the device platforms, all devices are included except Android, iOS, macOS, and Linux. So an attacker would just use a different platform in order to attack the environment. So we really need to have that set to no. And the reason it's asking me if I want to do that is because there is some issue with report only mode for macOS, iOS, Android, and Linux, where it will present a certificate warning whenever you're trying to do stuff in the portal. But I'm happy with that for now. I'm going to save this, and it's in report only mode, so there's no actual impact on my admins when I do that. Okay, that achieves the first thing I mentioned, but then I said don't stop there. A stretch goal would be to restrict privileged accounts to specific privileged access workstations. And this additional step has 2 benefits. One, the privileged users would be entering their credentials on devices that have additional security hardening, for example, a smaller attack surface, and therefore a reduced likelihood of compromise. Attackers must also use that specific device in order to perform an attack against privileged users, so that's less likely to be the case. So let's say now that you have actually issued 2 devices to all of your admins. One of them they do their normal work stuff on, and the other is for admin tasks only. They need to use that specific admin identity on that specific admin device to do work on Entra ID or in the Microsoft Entra admin portals. I mentioned in that article that you need to use a specific feature of conditional access to make this work. It's called filter for devices. That lets you look for a specific extension attribute. Let's look at this in a bit more detail. So if I go to new policy, and I'm going to call this restrict admin portals to privileged access workstations, and I'm not going to include any users just for this demonstration. Oops. And the target will be Microsoft admin portals, and the network is non-conditioned. We do need to set something. So down here we have filter for devices, and we get to select this, and we get to include or exclude. We'll talk about that in a moment, but we get to specify something here called an extension attribute. So extension attribute 1 equals, and we could make that something like PAW, or in the Microsoft documentation it says SAW for secure access workstation. But the point is that we need to find this extension attribute on that device in order for it to be included or excluded. In fact, we're going to choose exclude and choose done, and then we're going to use a grand rule of block to suggest that if the device is not found to have that extension attribute, and therefore it's excluded, then it will be blocked. So unless you're using a device with an extension attribute of PAW, it will be blocked and won't be able to access the Entra ID portal. Obviously that's a little bit strict, and you might struggle to get an extension attribute set on a device if you haven't already set one on a device. So be very careful when you're playing with this kind of thing, and obviously exclude your break glass accounts from this policy as well when you're doing that. So make sure you have your break glass accounts in here. So you would generally exclude your break glass accounts from all of these security policies so that you can get back in if and when you make a mistake. So this is ready to go. Apart from the fact that I haven't actually assigned it yet, we could theoretically turn this on, and it would prevent our admins from actually, let me see who it would be. Let's do directory roles, and we'll do global administrator as a demonstration. Okay, so I've created that. Now, if it wasn't in report only mode, it will be having an effect, and that effect would be that you can't access Entra ID unless you have that extension attribute. So what's an extension attribute then? It comes over from on-prem days. We'll go into devices. I'm going to show you devices in Entra. I'm going to show you one of my devices. Let's say client 4 is the privileged access workstation that I've given to Adele. So we're going to scroll down. You can see it says no extension attributes. So there aren't any set, and there's no way in this portal or in Tune actually directly to set this extension attribute. Let's see how we can do it. We're going to go with copying this device ID for now. I'm just going to copy that to the clipboard. We're going to head over to Graph Explorer. Now, if I was to choose this get here, I've actually just got that command by typing devices, and then we have a list Azure AD devices, and then we choose run. It won't work because I haven't given myself permission. So we can choose my name here, consent permissions, and we need to do a device. Nope. Directory. We need to do directory read write all. I'm going to choose consent on that. And it's asking if I can consent on behalf of the organization to read and write directory data, view basic profiles, and maintain access to that. So I'm going to choose accept, and that's now granted me permissions to do the thing I just tried to do, which is directory read write all. Give that a few seconds to do it thing. And you can see I've got this option to unconsent, which is grayed out, and we have the consent type as all principal. So let's just choose X, and choose run query, and then I'm going to choose get. I'm just going to grab this ID that I had in the clipboard, choose run, and there is the information from that device. And if we scroll down, you can see that extension attributes, and we've got 1 to 15, and they're all null. So I do need to add an extension attribute for this device. So the way we do that, and the only way to do that, really, the best way to do that is by choosing patch, and we're going to patch this device with an extension attribute. So that is going to be extension attributes, open brackets, extension attributes 1, let's call it PAW, and if we patch this device, if we run this query and patch that device, then it will have what did I do wrong? I didn't have access as user.all. Okay, add that. And we'll see if this works, or unless I've missed any more permissions. Great. Back to the request body, just choose run query, and no content 204 means it has been set. So now I'm just going to grab this, then do a get, and if we scroll down on client 4, we should see an extension attribute 1 has been set to PAW. So now when this device presents itself to enter ID and conditional access for an authentication attempt, it will have that extension attribute in the claim. That means that conditional access can look for that additional attribute and allow it through. That hopefully helped clear up what I was trying to say in that article, that you can filter for these privileged access workstations, and hopefully you can give it a go. Be very careful though, because restricting access to enter ID from specific devices, just make sure those devices are accessible and set up already before you actually enable that, and definitely make sure you have your break glass account set in conditional access before you try it. See you next time.